The pink canister of pepper spray caught the morning sunlight as it arced through the air. The golden retriever's yelp silenced the entire cul-de-sac. In that frozen moment, Karen Wilkins didn't register the horror on the faces of her neighbors, only the satisfaction that Regulation 7B of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association bylaws was being properly enforced. No unleash animals on common grounds. Karen's voice carried across the immaculate lawn as she tucked the pepper spray back into her designer handbag. It's for everyone's safety. The dog's owner, a man in his 30s with a rigid posture and a prosthetic leg partially visible beneath his shorts, stood stunned as his service animal writhed on the grass. "What have you done?" he whispered, dropping to his knees beside the whimpering retriever. "Ranger is a certified service dog. He wears his vest. You can see it." Karen adjusted her perfectly coiffed blonde bob and straightened the lapel of her coral blazer, the unofficial uniform of her self-appointed position as the HOA's most vigilant enforcer. "The rules are clear, Mr. Martinez. If there's a special exemption for your situation, it should have been filed with the committee. I don't make the rules." But she did. Karen had personally drafted 17 of the last 22 amendments to the HOA bylaws over her 4-year reign as board president. Cell phones were out now, recording the scene from porches and driveways. Karen noticed but didn't care. She had right on her side, the moral high ground of property values and community standards that she dedicated her life to upholding since moving to Oak Ridge Estates after her divorce. What Karen failed to notice was the group text rapidly circulating among the 34 households in the development emergency meeting. "Tonight, 7 p.m., Marino's garage. No carenes allowed." Behind her pristine bay windows later that afternoon, Karen scrolled through her planner, checking items off her list. The Martinez situation was unfortunate but necessary. The rules existed for a reason. Without them, chaos would reign. She'd seen it before in her previous neighborhood. One exception led to anarchy. First a service dog, then emotional support peacocks, then who knows what else roaming unleashed through their manicured community. She glanced at the framed photo on her desk, her receiving the Presidential Service Award at last year's HOA Gala. The silver-plated plaque beneath it read, "For unwavering dedication to property values and community excellence." That photo represented everything she'd built since Richard left, a kingdom of order where she made the rules. The doorbell's chime interrupted her thoughts. Karen opened her front door to find Police Officer Daniels standing on her porch. Behind him, the entire Martinez family, James in his wheelchair now, his wife Elena with puffy eyes, and their children huddled around what appeared to be a very subdued Ranger, his eyes still red and swollen. "Mrs. Wilkins," Officer Daniels said, his voice professionally neutral, "I need to discuss an incident involving Mr. Martinez's service animal. And I'm afraid there's also the matter of a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act to address." Karen's perfect world began to crack as she noticed, just beyond her perfectly trimmed hedges, a crowd of neighbors gathering. Their faces weren't friendly. "This is absurd." "I was enforcing our community standards," Karen said, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. "Officer Daniels, surely you understand the importance of rules." The officer's expression remained impassive. "Ma'am, attacking a service animal is a criminal offense in this state. Mr. Martinez has the right to press charges, which he intends to do." Karen's perfectly manicured nails dug into the leather of her bag. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. She made the complaints. She didn't receive them. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," she said, her voice taking on the practiced tone that had cowed countless retail managers and restaurant servers. Officer Daniels didn't blink. "You're welcome to do that at the station, Mrs. Wilkins. I'll need you to come with me to provide a statement." "I'm not going anywhere. I have an HOA emergency meeting in 2 hours." A bitter laugh escaped Elena Martinez. "That's funny, because so does everyone else in the neighborhood. Except you weren't invited." Karen's gaze darted past the officer to the growing crowd at the end of her driveway. Several neighbors held signs. She squinted to read one, "Service delegates servi carenes disturb." "This is harassment," Karen declared, pulling out her phone. "I'm documenting everything." "So are we," replied James Martinez, nodding toward a neighbor live streaming the confrontation. While Karen was processing this unexpected resistance, her phone buzzed with an email notification. The sender, Oak Ridge Estates HOA Board. The subject line froze her blood. Emergency board vote, removal of Karen Wilkins as president. "This is illegal," she sputtered, holding up her phone. "Ward meetings require 14 days' notice per our bylaws." From the crowd, Harold Jenkins, a retired attorney from 2 doors down whom Karen had cited last month for having wind chimes, stepped forward. Actually, Article 4, Section 12 permits emergency sessions in cases of actions causing immediate harm to the community. Your attack on a protected service animal qualifies. Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "You can't do this. I've dedicated years to this community." By terrorizing it, Alina Martinez said quietly, "My husband served 3 tours in Afghanistan. He came home with PTSD and missing a leg. Ranger helps him function. Do you have any idea what you've done?" For the first time, Karen really looked at James Martinez. The 1,000-yard stare. The slight tremor in his hands as they rested on the dog's head. The military posture even in a wheelchair. Something uncomfortable stirred in her chest. Was it shame? She pushed it down immediately. "I had no way of knowing." His vest says "service dog" in 3-inch letters, interrupted Sanovi Patel from across the street, whose rose bushes Karen had once reported for being 2 inches taller than regulation. "You chose not to see it." Officer Daniels cleared his throat. "Mrs. Wilkins, I still need that statement. We can do this at the station, or I can take it here. Your choice." Karen's phone buzzed again. The vote was in. Unanimous. She was out. 4 years of meticulous control gone in 4 minutes. As she mechanically answered Officer Daniels' questions, Karen caught sight of her reflection in the hallway mirror. Her perfect bob, her coral blazer, her expression of righteous indignation, all suddenly seemed like a costume rather than an identity. Across the lawn, she watched as neighbors brought water for Ranger, offered supportive hands on James's shoulders, and spoke in hushed, angry tones while glancing in her direction. These people had feared her, but they'd never respected her. The realization was like ice water down her spine. When Officer Daniels finally left with a promise to follow up about the charges, Karen stood alone in her doorway. The crowd remained, but now they were helping the Martinez family back to their home. Karen's phone rang. The Angela's attorney, whom she hired herself 2 years ago. "Hello, Karen. We need to discuss your legal position. The board has some concerns about potential liability." The walls were closing in, and Karen Wilkins, for the first time since her divorce, felt completely powerless. The Angela attorney's words echoed in Karen's mind as she paced her immaculate living room. Potential settlement, criminal charges, civil lawsuit, ADA violations. Each phrase landed like a physical blow. "This is a misunderstanding," Karen insisted, her voice rising. "I was protecting our community." "From a service dog?" The attorney sighed audibly. "Karen, there's video. It's already gone viral. # Karen is trending." Karen collapsed onto her pristine white sofa. Trending? She scrambled for her iPad and opened Twitter. There she was, her face contorted in righteous fury, the pink canister of pepper spray clearly visible in her manicured hand, the golden retriever writhing on the grass, the veteran's look of horror. The comments were worse. "HOA Karen needs to be charged with animal cruelty." "Who pepper sprays a service dog?" "Satan, that's who." "I'd recognize her. She made my grandmother cry over a bird feeder last year." Karen's finger hovered over the screen, trembling. This wasn't her. This couldn't be how people saw her. She was a defender of standards, a protector of property values. She was. The doorbell rang, interrupting her spiral. Karen peered through the peephole, expecting more protesters or perhaps another officer. Instead, she saw Harold Jenkins, the retired attorney, from down the street. "I know you're in there, Karen," he called through the door. "I'm not here to yell at you. I'm here to help you understand the gravity of your situation." Karen hesitated, then opened the door just enough to see him properly. "Are you representing the board now?" Harold shook his head. "No, I'm here as a neighbor who's concerned about how quickly this is escalating." "May I come in?" Against her better judgment, Karen let him enter. His weathered face showed no malice, just weariness. "I've watched you over the years," Harold said, declining Karen's automatic offer of tea. "You moved in after your divorce, threw yourself into HOA activities, and gradually turned this place into your personal kingdom." Karen bristled. "I've maintained standards that keep our property values high. Someone has too." "At what cost?" Harold gestured toward the window, where Karen had drawn the blinds against prying eyes. "You have no friends here, only subjects. And now they're revolting." "They'll get over it," Karen said with more confidence than she felt. Harold handed her a folded document. "This was drafted at the emergency meeting. It's a petition to amend the HOA's harassment clause, specifically naming your actions as examples of what won't be tolerated. It has signatures from 29 households already." Karen scanned the document, her vision blurring at the detailed list of her transgressions, each dated, documented, and attached to a neighbor's name. "I was following the rules," she whispered. "Rules you wrote," Harold countered gently. "Rules designed to give you control, not to make this a better place to live." The truth of his words stung worse than any accusation. "What about Martinez?" Karen asked, her voice small. "How is the dog?" "Ranger will recover. James is another matter. The incident triggered a severe PTSD episode. He's being treated now." The knot in Karen's stomach tightened. She thought of her own son, away at college, who rarely called anymore. He'd stopped visiting after she humiliated his girlfriend over parking in a visitor's spot overnight. "I didn't know," she said. "You never asked," Harold replied. "You never asked any of us about our lives, our circumstances. We were just potential rule breakers to you." Karen's phone buzzed with a text from the HOA attorney. Martinez's family declined initial settlement offer. Preparing for court. "What happens now?" Karen asked, suddenly feeling every day of her 53 years. Harold stood to leave. "That depends on you. The community is meeting again tonight. They're discussing a legal defense fund for the Martinez family." As he reached the door, he paused. "You know, Karen, I defended HOAs for 30 years before retiring. The best ones were never about rules. They were about neighbors caring for neighbors." The door closed behind him, leaving Karen alone with the truth she spent years avoiding. Beneath her crusade for perfect lawns and regulation height fences lay the rubble of her failed marriage and her desperate need to control something, anything, in her life. Outside, through a crack in the blinds, she watched Harold being greeted by a small group of neighbors. They spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing toward her house. For the first time in years, Karen Wilkins felt like the outsider peering in a community to which she no longer belonged. Karen's morning ritual had always been the same for 4 years, coughing on the porch while surveying her domain, noting any violations to report. Today, her doorstep held only a pile of printed papers, formal complaints filed against her with the HOA board she no longer led. She left them there and retreated inside. Her phone buzzed. A text from her son, Tyler. "Mom, what did you do? Someone from Oak Ridge sent me a video." Then a second message. "I'm coming home this weekend. We need to talk." Karen's hands trembled as she typed back. "It's being blown out of proportion." The reply was instantaneous. "You pepper sprayed a service dog, Mom. A veteran's service dog." No defense came to mind. She set the phone down and moved to her home office, where photographs from her life before Oak Ridge lined the walls. Karen with her ex-husband Richard at their wedding. Karen holding baby Tyler. Family vacations before the arguments became too frequent, before Richard's affair, before the divorce that had left her shattered. She hadn't always been this person. There was a time when neighbors had been friends, not subjects to regulate. The doorbell's chime startled her. Through the peephole, she saw Lena Martinez alone, her expression unreadable. Karen's instinct was to pretend she wasn't home, but something, perhaps Harold's words from yesterday, made her open the door. "Mrs. Martinez, Alina," the woman corrected. Her dark eyes held no anger, only exhaustion. "May I come in? I think we need to talk woman to woman." Wordlessly, Karen stepped aside. Alina Martinez entered the house, her gaze sweeping over the pristine interior. "Your home is beautiful," she said, her accent slightly more pronounced now that they were alone. "Thank you," Karen replied automatically. "Would you like tea, coffee?" "No, thank you." Elena sat on the edge of the sofa. "I came because my husband doesn't know I'm here. He would not approve." Karen remained standing, arms crossed defensively. "If this is about the legal action." "This is about understanding," Elena interrupted. She pulled out her phone and showed Karen a photograph. James in his military uniform, grinning broadly with his arm around a fellow soldier. This was James before his third tour, before the IED. She swiped to another image. James in a hospital bed, his leg gone, his face gaunt. Ranger came into our lives 2 years ago. Before that, James barely left his room. He couldn't handle crowds, unexpected noises, strangers. The dog gave him back his life. Karen sank into a chair, her defenses crumbling. "I didn't know." "You never asked," Elena said, echoing Harold's words from yesterday. "You saw us move in and immediately sent a list of HOA regulations. When James tried to introduce himself at the community barbecue, you complained about Ranger's presence near the food." Each memory struck like a physical blow. Karen remembered that day. She'd cited health code regulations without once considering why the man with a missing leg might need a dog beside him. "Why are you here?" Karen finally asked. "To make me feel worse? Because it's working." Elena's expression softened slightly. "I'm here because hatred solves nothing. I want you to understand what you've done, yes, but I also want to understand why you did it." The simple question, asked without judgment, broke something in Karen. Words spilled out about her divorce, her loneliness, how enforcing rules had given her purpose and control when everything else had slipped away. "That doesn't excuse what I did," she finished, surprised to find tears on her cheeks. "No," Melina agreed, "it doesn't, but it helps me see you as a person, not just the neighborhood tyrant." She stood to leave, pausing at the door. "James will still pursue legal action. That cannot change. But I wanted to see the woman behind the pepper spray before I made up my mind about you completely." "And?" Karen asked, hardly daring to breathe. Alina studied her for a long moment. "I think you're someone who forgot how to be a neighbor while trying to protect a neighborhood. Perhaps it's not too late to remember." After Alina left, Karen remained motionless, replaying the conversation. Outside, through her window, she could see neighbors gathering at the Martinez home, carrying food and flowers. Community, connection, everything she'd sacrificed at the altar of rules and regulations. Karen reached for her phone and, for the first time in years, dialed her ex-husband's number. "Richard, it's me. I made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how to fix it." Richard Wilkins arrived at Karen's house just as the evening news van pulled up to the curb. He was still handsome at 55, his salt and pepper hair neatly trimmed, his expression a mixture of concern and wariness as he approached his ex-wife's door. "You look terrible," he said when Karen opened it, ushering him quickly inside before the reporters could spot them. Karen didn't bother denying it. Her usually immaculate appearance had crumbled. Hair unbrushed, yoga pants instead of her tailored slacks, eyes puffy from crying. "Thanks for coming," she said, leading him to the kitchen where an open bottle of wine sat half empty beside a stack of legal papers. "I didn't know who else to call." Richard scanned the documents, the police report, the notice of a civil lawsuit, printouts of social media posts with Karen's face circled in red and captions like "Justice for Ranger" and "Luck her up." "When you said you made a mistake, I thought maybe you planted the wrong flowers or something." He looked up, his expression grave. "This is serious, Karen. What were you thinking?" "I wasn't," she admitted, filling glass for him. "I saw a rule being broken, and I reacted. I didn't stop to think about why the rule exists or who it might hurt." Richard took the glass but didn't drink. That sounds familiar. The words stung, but Karen couldn't deny their truth. Their marriage had ended partly because of her rigidity, her inability to bend even when circumstances demanded flexibility. "Tyler's coming home tomorrow," she said. "He's furious." Richard nodded. "He called me after he saw the video. He's worried about you beneath the anger." A knock at the door interrupted them. Karen tensed, but Richard placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "I'll get it." He returned moments later with Harold Jenkins, who looked surprised to see Karen's ex-husband. "Richard," Harold nodded, "didn't expect to see you back in Oak Ridge." "Special circumstances," Richard replied, gesturing toward Karen. Harold turned his attention to her. "I come with news. The board meeting just ended." Karen braced herself. "And?" "The neighborhood has created a legal fund for the Martinez family. But there's more." Harold placed a document on the table. "They're recommending your removal from the community entirely." "They can't force me to sell my house," Karen protested, though her voice lacked conviction. "No," Harold agreed, "but they can make remaining here extremely uncomfortable. The fines for harassment alone would be substantial." Richard skimmed the document. "This seems excessive." "Karen made a terrible mistake, but—" "It wasn't just one mistake," Harold cut in. "The community has compiled a 3-year record of incidents, targeted enforcement against certain homeowners, selective rule application, use of AOA funds for surveillance equipment without approval." Karen's face burned with shame as Richard's eyebrows rose in surprise. "I became something I never meant to be," she whispered. An uncomfortable silence fell over the kitchen. Finally, Harold spoke again, his tone gentler. "There might be a path forward, but it won't be easy. The Martinez family has indicated through their attorney that if you were to make a public apology, undergo community service, and pay for all medical expenses for both James and Ranger, they might consider reducing their claims." "I'll do it," Karen said immediately. "All of it, whatever they need." Richard and Harold exchanged glances. "There's more," Harold continued. "The community wants assurances this won't happen again. They're suggesting mandatory counseling and a community restoration project of some kind." Karen felt a flicker of her old defensiveness. "So I'm to be publicly humiliated and forced into therapy?" Richard touched her hand. "Or you could sell the house and start over somewhere else. Run away from the mess." The choice hung in the air between them. Karen looked around her kitchen, the pristine countertops, the awards for outstanding community service that now seemed hollow, the calendar filled with HOA meetings and neighborhood patrols. What had it all been for? Protection from the pain of her divorce? A way to build walls when relationships became too difficult? "I'll stay," she decided, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." As Harold left to relay her decision, Richard stayed, refilling their wine glasses. "It won't be easy," he warned. "People aren't quick to forgive." Karen met his gaze directly. "Were you?" "When I filed for divorce instead of working through our problems," Richard's expression softened. "Eventually. It took time." Outside, a news reporter was interviewing neighbors about the HOA Karen incident. Tomorrow, her son would arrive, full of disappointment and questions she wasn't sure how. The community center buzzed with tension as Karen entered, flanked by Richard and Tyler. Every seat was filled. Faces she knew from years of HOA meetings now turned cold and judgmental as she made her way to the front. The new HOA president, Sam Van Patel, called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of the gavel that had once been Karen's. "We're here to address the incident involving Karen Wilkins and the Martinez family's service animal," Zombie announced, her voice carrying through the packed room. "As agreed by all parties, Mrs. Wilkins will make a public statement before we proceed with community decisions." Karen stood, smoothing down the simple blue dress she'd chosen instead of her usual power suit. Tyler squeezed her hand briefly before she walked to the podium. The microphone feedback screeched, matching the anxiety coursing through her veins. She looked out at her neighbors, people whose grass length she had measured, whose paint colors she had scrutinized, whose lives she had policed in the name of property values. In the back row sat James Martinez in his wheelchair, Elena beside him. Ranger lay at his feet, a protective cone still around his neck. Karen's prepared statement suddenly felt inadequate. She set the paper aside. "For 4 years, I've stood at this podium and talked about rules," she began, her voice unsteady. "About standards. About maintaining what I thought made Oak Ridge Estates special. What I never talked about was people." She paused, swallowing hard. "I moved here after my divorce, feeling like a failure. Controlling this community became my way of feeling successful again. Each rule enforced was a tiny victory. Each violation reported made me feel needed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "But last week I crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. I heard a service animal that was helping a man who had already sacrificed more for this country than I could imagine. In that moment, I wasn't protecting our community. I was damaging it." Karen looked directly at James and Alina. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, there is no apology sufficient for what I did to Ranger and to your family. I am deeply, profoundly sorry. I will cover all medical expenses for both Ranger and for the trauma my actions caused Mr. Martinez. I've already made arrangements with your attorney." She turned back to the broader audience. "To my neighbors, I recognize now that an HOA should build community, not police it. I've agreed to relinquish my membership completely and to abide by whatever consequences you deem appropriate." The silence that followed her words felt endless. Finally, Zombie stepped forward. "The board has drafted a resolution based on input from all homeowners and the Martinez family. Karen Wilkins will complete 100 hours of community service at the Veterans Outreach Center, attend weekly therapy sessions for a minimum of 6 months, and participate in a community healing circle facilitated by a professional mediator." Karen nodded her acceptance of each term. "Additionally," Zombie continued, "Mrs. Wilkins has voluntarily offered to convert her immaculate front garden into a community space where service animals can train safely." This announcement caused surprised looks among the residents. It had been Karen's idea, a tangible symbol of her commitment to change, though surrendering her award-winning roses had been harder than she'd expected. After the formal motions passed, people began to file out. Some avoided eye contact with Karen entirely. Others offered small nods, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement of her effort. James wheeled himself forward, stopping directly in front of Karen. Up close, she could see the toll the incident had taken, new lines around his eyes, tension in his shoulders. "I don't forgive you yet," he said plainly. "But Elena told me about your conversation, about your divorce. I understand pain making people do things they later regret." Ranger looked up at Karen without fear or aggression, his gentle eyes somehow more condemning than any human judgment could be. "I'll earn back his trust," Karen promised, "and yours, if you'll let me try." James nodded once, then wheeled away, Elena following after giving Karen a small, encouraging smile. As the room emptied, Tyler approached his mother. "That couldn't have been easy," he said. "Dad told me you've been seeing a therapist already." Karen nodded. 3 sessions so far. It's uncomfortable. Necessary, but uncomfortable." Tyler's expression softened. "You know, I stopped visiting because I didn't recognize who you were becoming. Maybe now I'll get my mom back." For the first time in days, Karen felt a flicker of. 3 months later, Karen knelt in dirt, actual unmanicured soil, planting low shrubs along the perimeter of what had once been her immaculate front lawn. The transformation was nearly complete, her prized roses replaced by a gently sloping, grass-covered training area for service dogs, with sensory stations and specialized equipment donated by local businesses. "You missed a spot," said a voice behind her. Karen turned to find James Martinez, who had wheeled himself up the newly installed accessibility ramp. Ranger sat alertly at his side, his coat gleaming with health, no trace remaining of their traumatic encounter. "I'm still learning," Karen admitted, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her forehead. "Gardening for function instead of show is different." James nodded, his expression neutral but not hostile. "The trainer says this space is exactly what the community needed. 3 veterans with PTSD have signed up for the service dog program since you opened it." A small burst of pride warmed Karen's chest. "I'm glad it's helping." The past months had been a grueling exercise in humility. Her community service hours at the Veterans Center had initially been met with cold shoulders and whispered comments. The hashtag HOA Karen nickname had followed her there too. But she had scrubbed floors, organized files, and served meals without complaint, gradually earning grudging respect from the staff, if not acceptance. The therapy sessions had been even harder, excavating years of control issues stemming from her childhood with an alcoholic mother, examining how her divorce had triggered her worst tendencies, confronting the person she had become. Elena mentioned you're looking for a job, James said, breaking into her thoughts. Karen nodded. The lawsuit settlement took most of my savings. Not that I'm complaining, she added hastily. It was the right thing to do. The center needs an administrative assistant, someone good with details, organized. The pay isn't great, but... Karen stared at him speechless. You're offering me a job? After everything? James shrugged, his military posture momentarily relaxing. Elena thinks you deserve a second chance. Ranger seems to agree. He stopped having anxiety reactions when we walked past your house last month. As if understanding he was being discussed, Ranger gave a soft woof. Consider it, James said, handing her a card with the center director's information. Interviews Tuesday at 10. He wheeled himself back down the ramp, Ranger padding faithfully alongside him. Karen watched them go, then returned to her planting with renewed purpose. The community garden project had become her unexpected salvation. Neighbors who wouldn't speak to her directly would stop to admire the progress, sometimes leaving tools or plants anonymously on her porch. Richard pulled into the driveway, helping Tyler unload groceries from the trunk. Her ex-husband had been staying in her guest room on weekends, their relationship evolving into something new, not romance rekindled, but a friendship that had been missing during their marriage. Samvi called, Richard announced as they approached. The board approved your request to install benches along the perimeter. The construction committee will help next weekend. And I ran into Mrs. Patel at the store, Tyler added. She actually smiled at me. Karen's surprise must have shown on her face because Tyler laughed. Baby steps, Mom. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neighborhood goodwill can't be earned in 3 months. That evening, as they sat on Karen's porch sharing a meal, Harold Jenkins and his wife walked by with their grandchildren. The older couple slowed, then made a decision. Harold guided his family up Karen's driveway. We thought the children might like to see the garden's progress, Harold explained, somewhat stiffly. Karen smiled, standing to greet them properly. I'd be happy to show them around. We just installed a butterfly garden in the corner. As she led the curious children through the transformed space, explaining how service dogs would learn to help people there, Karen caught Harold watching her with something like approval in his eyes. Later, after everyone had gone and the neighborhood settled into even quiet, Karen sat alone on her porch swing. Her phone chimed with a notification, community alert from the HOA app she'd once wielded like a weapon.